So before we give you advice on how to play in a Dynasty League, we've got to tell you what the best settings are for a Dynasty League, especially if you're going to be starting your own, and then how to do that. Because there are a lot of different types of scoring in Dynasty Leagues and a lot of different settings that can really alter what you're playing. Okay, so you're starting a Dynasty League for the first time. Today, we're going to talk about all of the Dynasty League settings and league formats that you can play in and what we prefer. This is going to be preference, a lot of it. There are a lot of different ways to play in these leagues, a lot of different settings, a lot of different combinations of settings. However, today we are going to give you what each of these mean, and we're also going to give you what we call the domain rules. These are the rules that we play in every single one of our leagues, and we swear by these rules. But again, it's preference. Couple of general pieces of advice first for you. Try to find other active players. Redraft is a little bit different because, you join with people from work or you join with people from school, and half the people are going to be out of the playoffs and they're kind of just going to give up, and then it's okay because it's over after the season. With a Dynasty League, you're going to be playing with these people year after year. So it is going to be better to try and find players that are active. When you have leagues that have inactive players, it really does diminish the gameplay of Dynasty because those players are not trading, they're not doing waivers, and it's also stacking the rest of the league the longer that they're inactive, and it's going to create an imbalance in the league as years goes on. So definitely try to find the most active players for a Dynasty League that you can find. My second piece of advice for you is to not join a million leagues. A ton of people that we've played Dynasty with that are in, upwards of 60, 70, 80 leagues. I've found that managing a lot of Dynasty teams is fairly difficult. It takes the fun out of the actual strategy in Dynasty, and it becomes more of a task. Like, I have to go through and do this week and this week for this league and this league. When you only have a couple teams, I was able to spend more time on each team focusing on the strategic aspects of the game, like trading, and it made it a lot more enjoyable for me. So don't join too many leagues to the point where you aren't enjoying the strategic part of the gameplay anymore. So we run a lot of leagues, and these settings are what we have found the most success with. But first of all, what platform should you actually create your Dynasty League on? Sleeper is the correct answer. It's A, B, and C answers for this question. And honestly, Sleeper, if you're watching this, you should sponsor us because we're probably going to send a lot of people your way who are playing Dynasty for the first time. But Sleeper provides the best user interface and also the most features for your Dynasty team. It's highly customizable as well. I've never played in a Dynasty League on anything other than Sleeper. There are lots of different sizes of Dynasty Leagues and lots of different ways to play. Our favorite league size is going to be 12. We've seen as little as 6-team Dynasty Leagues and as many as 32-team Dynasty Leagues. 12 kind of provides a balance, especially when you're talking about Superflex, which means you're starting 2 quarterbacks, because in a 12-team league, it's going to have 24 relevant quarterbacks. That is about the line where it balances every year. With relevant quarterbacks, you typically have 6 to 8, give or take, quarterbacks that are either backups, fill-ins, or aren't going to last in the league. So it makes it pretty competitive, but also gives a balance on the most important position in the game. 12-team leagues also offer a great balance between star power and depth, because you're looking at 6-team leagues. 6-team leagues I don't necessarily prefer because you have a ton of studs on your roster, tons of stars, and each week you're just deciding which studs do I play. When you're playing in 32-team leagues, it's like, okay, I'm starting my 2 or 3 studs that I have, and then I'm trying to guess which bench players that I'm starting. In a 12-team league, you're starting a combination of studs, and also you're trying to find 3 or 4 flex position guys that are going to be less star-studded and are going to be more bench or role player level guys. And that's where some skill is involved in Dynasty. A 12-team format provides you an opportunity to balance the stars with some of the bench guys, and that, in my opinion, is an important piece of gameplay, and it makes it more fun, in my opinion. There are multiple ways to do lineups in Dynasty Leagues, but we are going to prefer classic lineups where you go through every week and you have to set your lineups. Again, this makes it a little bit more strategic. Best ball Dynasty Leagues are popular. I have found that they are less active. There is not as much trading, and I spend less time on my Best Ball Dynasty Leagues because I know that it's just going to start the best roster every week. When I'm actually thinking through who I'm going to start and who I'm going to put in my lineup, it makes me a lot more willing to go out and try to make trades with people, and that's more fun. So we like the traditional classic lineup setting style in Dynasty Fantasy Football. So let's talk about waivers. There's a lot of different ways to do waivers in every type of league. Traditionally, in redraft leagues, the common way to do waivers is to just have the set waiver wire order each week, and then if your claim is at the top, then you get it. In Dynasty, we like to add a strategic aspect to the game. So our preferred way of doing waivers is what's called free agent bidding. And this is going to be where you get a budget twice a year of, you could set it at anything, $100, $1,000, but you're going to get a budget that resets at the beginning of the season and at the beginning of the off season that you will spend on waivers. When you're doing these bids, it's going to allow you to actually take part in a strategic part of the game, and that's how much of your waiver budget to put on certain players. These waivers are going to clear at 3 a.m. on Wednesday, and players that are dropped are going to stay on the waivers for 2 days after they are dropped. Again, there's multiple ways to do that, but that's just what we do in our leagues. There's a setting in Sleeper called Review Pending Trades, and then there's a period of time you can set. When we started our first domain leagues, we actually had a trade review period of like 2 days, and basically we would say, okay, both teams have to approve this trade for us to push it through, and we'd push it through once both teams said approve. In my more recent leagues, I found that the more people I play with that I trust, the less I have to use that, so I actually don't have a trade review period on, and the trades go straight through. That's probably what I would recommend if you trust who you're playing with. The reason to have a trade review period would be if somebody makes a trade and that trade sits in somebody else's inbox for 50 days, and in the course of that 50 days, the players involved in the trade, their values fluctuate. And then 50 days later, some guy sees it and he's like, oh, I'm totally smashing this trade now because Nick Chubb just destroyed his leg. And then they accept the trade. And then the other guy goes, well, that's not fair. I sent that trade 50 days ago. We've run into that a couple times. But again, if you're playing with people you trust, you should not have that issue. We'd recommend probably not doing a trade review period. Depending on who you ask, Nathan would probably say he likes the trade review period. Trading is one of the most fun and most important parts of strategy in Dynasty, so we prefer either the latest trade deadline you can set, so right before the playoffs, or no trade deadline at all. Either way you want to do it is fine. If you do a later trade deadline, then you are going to prohibit teams in the playoffs that advance into further rounds from further stacking their team. I personally prefer this way, but a lot of people just say it's Dynasty, it's going to be hurting them next year anyways, so we don't like a trade deadline. The one thing we are against, though, is having an early trade deadline. You're basically forcing your fringe playoff teams to decide whether they're going to contend or rebuild 2 or 3 or 4 weeks before the playoffs. In our opinion, this is stupid. I mean, players and teams should be able to trade all the way up until the playoffs at the very least, so we like to set our trade deadlines late or have none at all. One setting that's fairly controversial actually in Dynasty leagues is the league median. Basically, this takes the median number of points scored in your league every week and puts that as a matchup that counts towards your win or loss totaled throughout the season. So essentially, you're playing 2 games each week, one against your opponent and the other against league median. If you think about it, what a league median does is it basically balances out those people who have bad luck with points against them scored. So you're talking about a team that may be 3rd or 4th in max PF, but they're 8th in standings because they have the most points scored against them. However, what a league median would do is it would balance that out. It would add a lot of wins to that column because you're scoring more points than average, and it would allow you, instead of missing the playoffs because you had bad matchups or just got unlucky with points against you scored, it would allow you to sneak in the playoffs because it's trying to balance out some of the luck aspect of this. We personally don't play in a lot of league median leagues because we prefer a little bit more of a traditional style fantasy football with some of the luck in there, but I definitely don't blame people who want to play in league median leagues, and I definitely don't blame you if you want to start your league with a league median, because in my opinion, it does balance out some of the luck and skill aspects of the game of building a team. Draft pick trading can be toggled on and off in Sleeper Dynasty leagues. Allow it. That's what makes this fun. That's why Sleeper is good, because it allows you to do that, and it adds a whole nother level of strategy to your Dynasty startups. So like I said, make sure you turn on draft pick trading, because that is an important part of one of the most fun parts of Dynasty, and that's the startup draft. Let's talk about trading and trade vetoes. So trade vetoes should pretty much never, ever, ever happen. I think we've done one trade veto in thousands and thousands of trades that we've been a part of when we've commissioned leagues. That should almost never happen. It's got to be egregious. It has to be proved. And I do understand when people go to Twitter and they're like, yeah, should this trade be vetoed? And usually the overwhelming response is no, because again, trades really shouldn't be vetoed unless they're egregious and it's clear cheating, which has happened before, but it's unlikely. Let's talk about the rookie draft order, because if you just set your rookie draft order based on who had the worst record and they get the #1 pick, this would basically allow for what we call cheating, because you could essentially take your star players that should be in your starting lineup, you could throw them on your bench, and then you could lose all your games, have the best team, and still get the #1 pick. It basically allows for blatant and aggressive tanking and cheating. So the way around this is to set your draft order based on max points for. Max points for is the best possible score from your best lineup every week, and then it's added up throughout the course of a season. And basically what this determines is the best and worst teams in your league. It essentially ensures if you set your draft order by reverse max PF, that the worst team gets the first pick. And out of the playoff teams, the best team out of those non-playoff teams gets the 6th pick. This is going to provide balance to your league. It's going to prevent tanking. It's also going to make for the most fair results and also increase the longevity of your league. Highly recommend reverse max points for to determine your rookie draft order. For playoff teams, it's going to be, number one, which round were you eliminated? So say there were 2 teams eliminated in round 1 of your fantasy football playoffs. Then those 2 teams would be the 7th and 8th pick. The order would be decided by the lowest max points for.
Typically, your playoff rounds are going to start around week 15, and this is standard pretty much across the board. Regardless of how many teams you have in your league, you want to likely be starting in week 15 so that you're not ending your season in week 18 when likely half of the NFL's teams are sitting their starters. Now, when we're talking about 12-team leagues, generally half of those teams are going to make the playoffs. This is, again, going to be a pretty common occurrence for any league. If you have an 8-team league, you should probably have 4 teams that are making the playoffs. If you have a 16-team league, you should probably have 8 teams making the playoffs. When you have 6 teams in your standard 12-team league, you're going to have 2 teams that are on a bye in the first round in week 15. That puts you at a significant advantage if you're the 1 or 2 seed, and it's really rewarding. Each round of the playoffs is 1 week long. As easy as that. There's nothing cute that we're doing in Dynasty, no like multi-week best of matchups or anything like that. Now, on the topic of roster settings, we typically like to have 10 starters, not including defense and kicker, which, spoiler alert, you should not be including in your Dynasty leagues. No defense and kickers, please. Please, just don't do it. But the settings that we're going to have are 1 quarterback and a super flex spot. So you could consider that 2 QB spots if you wanted to. The super flex spot just adds flexibility for bye weeks, injuries at the quarterback position. Maybe you only drafted 1 quarterback in your league, in a super flex league, and you have to put in a wide receiver, a tight end, a running back in that super flex spot. For the running backs and wide receivers, we're going to have 2 required running back spots specifically, and then 3 wide receivers. That's really going to just help reflect the scarcity of the running back position in the NFL right now and the abundance of wide receivers available for every team. And that just is a very fair distribution that we found. Now, at tight end, this is going to be the most bare landscape in Dynasty Fantasy Football, even more than in quarterbacks in Superflex. And that's why we're only going to require 1 spot for you to start your tight ends. And we're going to give you a little hint here. If you're not starting a top 4 dominant fantasy tight end in your tight end spot, just spam that position in your startup draft and start Taysom Hill. He's going to put you at an advantage just as much as a Tyler Higbee would or a Pat Freiermuth 10 rounds earlier. Then to close it out, we're going to have 2 flex spots on top of the super flex position here, which is just going to allow a wide receiver, a tight end, or running back to put in that spot. These are going to be your flexible options every single week that on a good week, maybe you're not starting one of your lower end guys. On a bad week, you got to put your depth options in those flex positions and hope that they have big weeks for you. Now, to meet the total roster spots of 25 for each team, we're going to have 15 bench spots and then an additional 5 taxi spots so that you can kind of build up depth and some developmental players who aren't necessarily going to contribute to the points of your team this season. We don't really believe in position limits. There's not really a point. We are big advocates, which we'll talk about in future strategy videos, for building up wide receivers if you're like a rebuilding team. And if you're putting limits on each position, that just is really going to impact the future outlook of your teams in your league. We also don't find it necessarily fair if you're going to be limited with your roster spots depending on how many players you have injured. If you have 5 guys on IR, you should be able to put 5 guys on IR. Typically, you're going to see about 5 injured reserve slots in each league that we're going to run. If your league has less than that and you have 6 guys on IR and you can't put 3 of them on there because all the spots are filled, try to appeal that in your league. Like, If you have a lot of guys injured, why should they be stuck on your active roster when they're not contributing in any way? It's not your fault that they got injured. Try to be as flexible as possible with those IR spots. Now, if you're not playing in a PPR league, we're not a huge fan of that because we don't think it directly reflects the value of wide receivers in the NFL, and that can massively inflate the value of, say, quarterbacks and your bell cow running backs. We also generally are going to include a half-point tight end premium bonus. This is going to help balance that large gap between the wide receiver and tight end positions, and it's going to help you to really have impactful players in your lineup on a week-to-week basis in that tight end spot. One of the settings that we've really stood by for multiple years in Dynasty Fantasy Football at the quarterback position specifically is 4-point passing touchdowns versus 6-point rushing touchdowns. Now, this is really going to help you inflate the value of rushing upside quarterbacks. If you have a 6-point passing touchdown league, make sure you take note of that and don't inflate the value of rushing upside quarterbacks like you would in your standard 4-point passing touchdown league. This is going to, again, give dual threat quarterbacks a little bit more value, which is going to compensate for their lack of longevity compared to your traditional pocket passers. It's also going to help balance scoring between quarterbacks and other positions. Honestly, if you are accounting for a passing touchdown equal to a receiving touchdown, that's just not fair. Your wide receivers aren't scoring 30 touchdowns a year like your quarterbacks are.
So let's talk about these startup draft settings. The startup draft is what kicks off your league and also one of the most fun things to do in Dynasty Fantasy Football. So we typically have a 25-round startup draft. This is going to be 10 startable players and then 15 bench players. Our total roster size, once you put in taxi spots, is technically 30. So what we do is we set the taxi slots to 0 for the draft, and then we put them back at 5 after the draft because 30-round drafts kind of suck. Excluding those rounds will also keep your waivers more competitive throughout the season and even in the offseason, and that's part of the game. So that makes it a little bit more fun. Draft pick trading, like I mentioned earlier, is not only allowed, but it is encouraged. It's going to make the draft more fun, more strategic, and it's also going to allow for more complexities in the game as you move through your startup draft at the beginning of your Dynasty League. Third round reversal is critical in Superflex Dynasty Leagues. What a third round reversal is, you have a typical snake draft for the first 2 rounds. So you start at the 101, goes all the way down to the 112, and then goes back. Instead of reversing back from the 212 to the 301, it's going to jump back to the other side and let the people who picked at the end of the first round pick at the first part of the third round. This essentially ensures that these teams who did not have a chance to get guys like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, CJ Stroud, Joe Burrow, those hyper valuable quarterbacks. This is basically going to ensure some balance in the league because those quarterbacks and those assets are almost disproportionately more valuable than the ones at the end of the first round. So because of that, we're going to balance out the league. Every league we've done with third round reversal has been more balanced than ones we've done without. So we're highly recommending third round reversal to you. When you are drafting in a dynasty startup, you are going to be using kickers, and kickers are basically going to be placeholders for rookie picks. You are drafting the actual pick. You're drafting the choice and the freedom to make the choice once it comes to the rookie draft. Now let's talk about after the NFL draft. This one's a little bit easier, and it's also a little bit more strategic because at this point, you are basically calling your shots on players in startup drafts. So you draft the rookies with the veterans. It's that simple. A lot of people get antsy from December to March to get into startup drafts, just end up drafting kicker placeholders for rookie picks. I think this is a fun way to do it as well, and it also gives you more flexibility. When you think about it, these rookie picks are more valuable than the rookies themselves because it gives you the choice. And it also gives you flexibility to trade out of that and give somebody else the choice. So it does make it a little bit more fun and adds a little bit of a wrinkle to the strategy of a startup draft.
When you're looking to start your own league, the overall concept is going to be pretty simple. Pick the settings that you prefer, and what's most important is making sure that all your league mates can come to an agreement or a compromise. Again, we're going to recommend Sleeper when you're coming up with these settings and starting your league, and Sleeper better sponsor us for this. Remember, above all, when you're coming up with your league settings for a Dynasty League, do not include defense or kicker. That's the only black and white for sure. Please do not do that in any of your Dynasty Leagues. It's not necessary. So Get your friends together, hold that startup draft, have fun with it, see how long you can get that Dynasty League to go year after year. And just remember that when you're drafting rookies before the NFL draft, in a startup draft, make sure you're drafting those kickers as placeholders. And if it's post-draft, Sleeper is going to have all the rookies implemented into the ADP, so you can just draft the players then.